Fantastic.
Good morning. This is Avraham Shira from the Chabura and Nahar Shalom. This morning we're going to do a very interesting piece of Gemara from Masechet Berachot, Daf Yud Amud Bet, that deals with a famous story from the Tanakh of the Shah and her husband. And it's an interesting... But yesterday it was fine.
No, it happened once. But
Okay.
You're live again, so I might go in and out.
Right. The broadcast might go in and out, everyone, so forgive, if you will. So we're going to begin here with Tomer El Isha. Ine na yadati ki ish Elohim kadoshu. So the Shunamit's husband said to her, "Now I didn't know that Elisha was the man of God, the prophet of the generation, who, like most prophets, he traveled a lot and went from place to place, and also did a lot of court cases and trying to decide issues for other Jews. And the husband didn't know that he was such a great holy man." So Gemara asks, "O Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Hanina, mikan sha'isha makeret ba'orachin yoter me'a'ish." So we learn from this statement that a woman is more sensitive to her guests that come to her house than the husband. And the sensitivity of a woman to her guests is not simply what they like to eat or what they like to drink or where they should sit, etc. But rather we see here, because of the Shunamit, the sensitivity to is their spiritual level. That she perceives in Elisha that he's a holy man. Now remember, back in the day, they didn't have pictures of rabbis on the wall. They didn't have videos of rabbis on Facebook. They didn't have any type of mass recording of people's faces. So if you hadn't seen somebody in person, you wouldn't know what he looked like. You wouldn't have a face print, right? And so, like we said yesterday, the only mirrors they had were polished brass and copper and things like that. But a mirror's not going to help you, because you're not going to. How do I know that's the prophet? Because I don't know his face unless someone else tells me I saw him and that's him, or I saw him and that's not him. So this facial recognition is an interesting thing, especially today with the the new technology and facial recognition. Back then, the only one you had was you. And so the husband of the Shunammite didn't know that he was a holy prophet, but his wife did. Was telling us that she perceived things that he didn't. And we know that the Gemara teaches us that women have an extra measure of bina, called bina yetera, and that means that God gave women an extra understanding, and not just to people who go to college, and not just people who get degrees and people that have life experience. No, women have extra understanding, and I believe it's because Hashem had mercy on them to give them extra understanding to help them deal with men. The women have to deal with men. They have to raise a family. They have to deal with the kids, and it's not an easy job. And so the Shunammite, she obviously had insight that her husband didn't have. Okay. So Rabbi Hanina said that we see that she knows her guests more than her husband. Manayada, well, how did she know? Rabu Shmuel. So these two great rabbis commented, each one, Hadamar shelo ra'ata zivuv over al shulchano, Hadamar sadin shel pishtan etzia al mitato velo ra'ata keri alav kadosh hu. Okay, so Rav and Shmuel give two answers how she knew. The first thing she said, she never saw a fly pass over him when he was sitting at the table, which is a fascinating thing, really, because I think back in the day, they probably had more flies than we do. They didn't have refrigeration. They had open food everywhere. They didn't have screens on their windows. So flies were probably more a part of their everyday life. And therefore, if a holy person comes into the room, then part of the sign of holiness is that negative things don't get near him. Now, why is a fly negative? Well, we know how flies can irritate you, in a barbecue or something, and fly or buzz around your head. But in Kabbalah, a fly is a klipa. Now, what does that mean? It means that the fly represents a spiritual force on the other side, and as do moths and almost every creature. Most of the main creatures that we find in our everyday lives have appellations in Kabbalah that represent forces that are, we say, from the other side. So the fly is the idea of of separation. That there's a separation between either the prophet and Hashem, in which case there wasn't, because there was no flies around around Elisha. But we remember back also, he said that there were no flies in the Beit HaMikdash, and they had an open slaughterhouse going all day long. So how could it be? Except for the Kedusha of the Beit HaMikdash pushed away these things. And so too a prophet is at this level of Kedusha that it will be pushed away from him as well. So it's very interesting. Like a moth, for example, the moth is a creature that is attracted to the light. And we say that the light, of course, of all the lights, the highest mitzvah of all mitzvahs is Emunat Hashem, right? The first commandment is Ani Hashem, which means to believe in Him. And so the idea of a moth is a creature that goes to the light. It's a klipa that wants to eat your faith. That means if I see moths around, I'm having a problem with my faith. Now I'll tell you a funny thing about this. Once I was in the mikveh of the Arizal in Tzfat, and I was having questions about should I marry a woman, let's say, and a moth flew out of my clothes. So I knew that I wasn't having faith at that moment. In other words, the thought becomes projected in the outside world through things like a klipa. Or if I see a fly buzzing around me, it means leave, Avraham, go somewhere else. It doesn't mean necessarily swat the fly, kill the fly. It's got a spiritual power there. It's telling me leave. There's something impure here. Because, rotting meat is an impure thing. So this is one way that we see that the woman, the Shunammite, was sensitive enough to read that if the flies are not bothering this guy, he's got to be holy. I.e., that flies were bothering everybody else, in their day and age. So this is one thing that I think is to the credit of Tuvia writes, our friend Tuvia writes, kill the fly. Okay, Tuvia, well, the problem is there's other flies coming. But going further, the second thing she said was that they had an interesting thing. They made a room for Elisha Hanavi. And yesterday we dealt with what the room was about and different types of, it was an attic, and some say it was a porch that they put a roof on. But either way, what the main features were that the woman suggested building the room for the prophet and giving him a table, a chair, a candle, and a bed. And on his bed, the Gemara tells us that he had silk sheets. Flax sheets. Linen, thank you. Which is made from flax, right? And on his bed. And she didn't see any sign of impurity on the sheets. Now this is kind of like a little close to home here. Who checks anybody's sheets, But okay, let's say the prophet came over, he spent the night, and he left. Now she goes up to the room to change the bed. Okay, that's nice. She's running a little motel there. No problem. But for her to pay attention to such a thing seemed to me a bit strange. But, maybe it was more common back in the day. Or maybe that she had experience with this in other situations. But regardless, the idea was that when a person reaches a level like Elisha Hanavi, he doesn't see emissions at night, and he doesn't, wake up in an impure state. Okay. So her noticing these things was a sign that she was at a higher level than her husband. Okay. Besides the fact that she knows how to deal with the guests that come to her house. Now, so the Gemara goes on. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Hanina, who kadosh misharato eno kadosh. Well, Elisha was she also had this power. The Rav is bringing that she saw that Gehazi, Elisha's servant, was not holy. Now that's a bit of a strong statement to say about any rabbi or any prophet's main attendant, because they all had attendants. What? The Gabbai, yeah. The Gabbai, if you will, right? Also, the Gehazi that was a servant of Elisha means that he's around this holiness all the time. It's like being in the Beit HaMikdash all the time. You watch yourself. In the Beit HaMikdash, you can't sit down, you can't fall asleep, you can't take out a sandwich, you can't smoke a cigarette, you can't pop a beer, right? It's holy. And so Gehazi should have had that consciousness when he was with his master Elisha, the prophet. But Gehazi, we knew that he didn't, that he disobeyed his master, and he went after Naaman, the general of the Assyrian army, and he wanted to receive gifts from him. And the prophet had told him, don't take anything from him. So there's an inyan about passing gifts, that it's much deeper than we realize. When you take a gift or give a gift, you're making a connection. And that connection is more than just the object. It's a spiritual thing. And there's a statement from Shlomo Melech, that someone who hates gifts will live. Because, in the old days, they used to give gifts that were poisoned. And so it was a nice way to take out your enemy by deceiving him, etc., etc. So, sonei matanot, hating gifts means you'll live, means that I don't need gifts, I'm not looking. If they come, they come. You're allowed to receive them. But you're not supposed to like them and look for them. Yeah, Mordechai.
I heard from my Gemara teacher.
You're a Gemara teacher, yeah.
Many years ago. The Yiddish taich of that is Sheina Matanas Ichya.
Sheina, right?
Sheina Matanas, nice gifts, Ichya, yeah. I'm all
Sheina Matana. Sheina, like, right. Okay, that's
nice
a little Yiddish joke.
Nice,
if it's a nice gift, if it's a diamond ring, if it's a diamond ring, take it and we'll talk about it after,
Rabbi Greenberg, all over
right,
Greenberg.
I remember one time a guy who had a little bit of money, I was giving him a ride, and we walked to the parking lot, and he saw my car, and he said, "This is your car? Are you kidding? This old beat-up wagon?" And I live out in the mountains, and that's all we drive, is old beat-up wagons, because it takes a beating and keeps on clicking, right?
Otherwise, they become old beat-up.
So the guy pulls out his wallet, and he hands me $5,000 on the spot to buy another car.
Oh, yeah?
So I wasn't going to say no. And I'm still alive.
Yeah, write me a check.
Right.
Where's the wagon? Where's the beat-up wagon?
The beat-up wagon's long gone. It actually got stolen. It got stolen from the same parking lot where he gave me the money for another car.
Oh, wow.
Very interesting. It was like a changing of the guard. Nonetheless, so the relationship to gifts is also important because, like, for example, if you go out on a date with a woman, it's your first date, you don't buy her a diamond ring. You buy the ring when you're going to propose. Right? And in Yiddishkeit, in Judaism, when you go out on dates, you don't usually even eat a meal together because that's a very intimate thing to eat food together. No. On the first dates, usually you have a cup of tea or a coffee or something like that.
Yeah.
But eating food is an intimate thing. And so if you want to buy a woman you just met a steak dinner, it's also a strange gift. In other words, so gifts have power and they have connection. And we know that oftentimes people also keep a ledger. Oh, I bought you something. Where's my gift? We even have a halacha about that. If you go to a friend's wedding, right? If I go to your wedding and you give me a nice meal, then I am beholden to you the value of a nice meal, and that's Torah. That's not derech eretz of nice people, right? The Torah is telling us this is the way we're supposed to behave. Okay. So the Shunammite is this special woman who's in touch with things that a lot of people are not, and that obviously explains why the prophet went to her, right? That she, because the prophet, when he comes to town, he's not looking to stay in the worst place in town. Right? He wants to find a holy place, and so obviously that's where Shem took him. Okay, and Gehazi was not holy, and ultimately he got the tzarat that Naaman had to get rid of. Naaman, remember, was afflicted with skin disease, and his people said, go to the prophet in Israel, he can heal you, and he did, and Elisha blessed him and told him to go dip 7 times in the Jordan, and he dipped, and he was healed. His skin flaked off of him like a baby, had brand new skin, which I've seen people go into shock, and that happens to them. And after the miracle happened and Naaman was all healed, he said, well, I got to go give a gift to Elisha. And Elisha said, no, I don't want your gift. It's okay. And then Gehazi ran after him to get the gift. And then what happens, this very interesting thing. He took the gift, and he went back to Elisha's residence where he was staying, and he hit the door, and the tzarat that had been on Naaman jumped on Gehazi. In other words, this disease was in the air. In other words, spiritually, there was a shift. Oh, you want the gift of this person who was a warrior coming to kill Jews, essentially. The general of the Assyrian army is not here because he needs a weekend away. He's here to conduct wars, kill people. So his sarat jumped over right on Gehazi, and he became all white, and his skin went. So you see, when a prophet says something, you really got to take it seriously. And we all have this lesson, because sometimes rabbis tell us things and we do them, and sometimes we don't. And often it's better not to ask than to ask and not do it is what the rabbi says, especially if he's on the level, really on the level. Okay, that's another whole question about being on the level, but we're not going to go there now. Okay. It says, when they bring a pasuk, Vayigash Gehazi lahadafa. Gehazi came to, and he was pushed away. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, she'achazai bahod yofiyah. No, Rabbi Hanina tells us another thing, that Gehazi was very impressed with the looks of the Shunammite, which means he's looking in the wrong place. She's a married woman. He's the servant of a prophet. What are you doing looking at somebody else's wife? So that's another problem.
The real question is, why did Elisha have him around?
Right.
Well, that is a very good question. We asked that yesterday too. Why did Elisha have a servant who's not on the level? And so it could be two reasons. Either Hashem hid it from him, and because the prophet can have Ruach HaKodesh 95% of the time, but 5% that he doesn't have it, Hashem might be trying to do something else.
Or he didn't.
Or he had the potential to be great.
Or he knew.
Right.
He had the potential to be great, very good Mordechai. But it could mean that Gehazi had a role to play in the story of the Shunamites, so that people could see the hanhaga, the behavior, the custom of how the prophet operates amongst the people. Going to the Shunamite, Gehazi's there, he's bringing stuff, he's serving the prophet, and then we see that even someone at a high level can still fall for a bit of greed. This gift, he wanted the gift. That's greed, when the prophet told him not to take it. So it could be that he allowed him to be his servant only to teach all of us for thousands of years about greed and taking gifts from people that we shouldn't. Rabbi Yeshua Kohen Gadol, yeah. That Rabbi Yeshua Gadol, Yosef adds. Right. Wow, right. Right, that Rabbi Yeshua Kohen Gadol was Kohen Gadol for 80 years, and then he
blew it in the end.
He as they say, crashed and burned. He lost his Kedusha, and he was ignobly removed from the Kahuna, or at least from being Kohen Gadol. Anyways, so oftentimes things happen. It doesn't look like it should have happened, but really Hashem is running the show to teach us, and thank God we have these people to learn from. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Hanina, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Kol hame'areach Talmid Chacham betoch beito. Anybody who has a Talmid Chacham as a guest in his house, mehanehu, and he gives him food and drink and takes care of his needs from his own pocket. It's as if you've brought a korban tamid in the Beit HaMikdash. Now we know that a korban is a spiritual exchange to bring mercy onto people. And we see here that there's no Mizbeach, there's no Beit HaMikdash, but we have this concept of giving food, doing chesed and kindness to Talmidei Hachamim is like a korban. Well, why? If you're not a Talmid Hacham, it's not a korban? What's the difference? Well, I think one way we can understand this is we're talking about people at an extremely high level of Talmid Hacham. It's not a guy that just learned Torah, and he sat and learned Shas, and he's a great guy. These are extremely. We're talking Talmid Chacham in the name of in Shas is someone who has Ruach HaKodesh, has seen Techiyat Metim, has seen Eliyahu and Navi. These are very high people, and so when he eats, he's like a mizbeach. He burns the food up like the mizbeach will burn up the offering, and we all burn food in our bodies. That's how we stay alive. But the difference is the refinement of the burning, the refinement of the power that comes out of it. And so when a Talmid Chacham eats, when the Talmid Chacham eats your food, he's elevating it higher than if I ate it myself, because he's more refined. So he, being more refined, refines the food more. And there's a lot to be said about food. We've talked a lot over the weeks and months about Rabbi Nachman and food and eating and the healing of the power of food. But I don't want to digress too much. So it's like bringing a korban to give food to the right people, to the holy people. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Hanina mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Another statement: Al ya'amod adam b'makom gavoa v'yitpalel. Okay, we're changing gears here to a new subject, but it's a derech eretz type of thing also, which is it's always interesting why they put one section next to another. But here we're being told a halacha that a person should not pray in a high place. Ela b'makom namuch, but rather we should pray in a low place. And pray from there. Shneimar, it's written, B'mamakim karaticha Hashem. Right, the famous verse from King David that says, from the depths I called out to you. From the depths, dafka. It doesn't say, I called out to you from the heights. Right, because obviously the comparison is between arrogance and humility. And this might even reflect back on our little story with Elisha and Gehazi, the difference between humility and arrogance. But nonetheless, it's like if you let's say you're with friends outside, and you're under a tree and you want to pray. If there's a high place, don't stand on it so you're higher than everybody else. Or if there's steps in a place, like the steps here up to the altar or to the bama. See, I call it an altar. That's what it's supposed to be. Even the Masons got that down, right? They have altars in their temples. If you climb up on those steps when everybody else is praying, you're looking like you're up higher than everybody, and that's not a good position to be in ever.
Except for the Kohen.
Right, the Kohen does it because he has a job, but we don't. But we shouldn't do it. So the Gemara goes on to tell us, Tanya Namihachi also is written, Lo Ya'amod Adam al Gave Kisei. You shouldn't stand on a chair and pray. V'lo al Gave Sharafraf, and you shouldn't stand on a footstool and pray. V'lo Makom Govoa. And not stand in any high place and pray. Now, if you live in the 100th story of a skyscraper, Mordechai, you're allowed to pray that high up. But we're not allowed to step a half foot higher than my friend standing next to me. You see the difference? Ella, rather, we're told again, b'makom namuch yitpalel, we should pray in a low place. Now, lefi she'ein gavahut, because there's no such thing as height in front of Hashem. Hashem is the great equalizer. God makes everybody equal, whether you're a millionaire or you're poor, whether you're smart or you're not. And gavhut is this idea of being high or higher than anybody else. So Hashem equals everybody out. Now, Shneimar Mamakim Karatich Hashem, again he brings the same pasuk to support the idea. Ketiv tefila la'ani ki yatov. The prayer of a poor person when he covers himself. The remez here, to cover yourself usually means to put on a talit in the morning. But also it's this idea of yatov, you're poor, you're lowly. And that's a good position to pray from. Because really before Hashem we're all poor. Okay? At least even if you're a billionaire, you could be very poor in spirituality. And you could be very poor in good deeds. So our way of measuring is not Hashem's way of measuring, and that's a very important sensitivity we need in this world. Amar Yossi bar Hanina mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. This is an interesting one. A person who prays also needs to point his feet together, in a straight stance, like it's like a soldier at attention, really. My son is in the army, And he has two different postures. One with the feet together, that's when he's standing at attention before his officer. And when, like they say in all the movies, at ease, right? At ease, what happens? The feet spread, the hands go behind the back, the shoulders come down a little bit. That is a posture of relaxation, not of standing at attention before the general. So when we stand to pray, we're really standing before the king, and there's an appropriate posture. And we deal with this in a class, in an essay that we're going to put up soon, Ariel, called The Body Language of Kabbalah. Because there's a whole set of cues that we do with our body that are laden with meaning and profound teachings. So we'll get there. God willing, stay with us. Okay, so it says, the man should point his legs, because it says about the angels that were seen in Yehezkel's prophecy of the chariot, the Maseh Merkava, that these angels, Raglehem Regel Yeshara, that their legs were straight legs. Why? In other words, because an angel doesn't need legs. An angel flies. An angel doesn't land. He's always in movement wherever. And so the idea is that you have, the angel is, of course, is just an embodiment of a spiritual being, and it has to have shape for us to catch it with our eyes. And if you see an angel, you'll see that it won't have legs unless there's a necessary reason. Okay. Now, going further, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Bar Rabbi Chanina, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, my dictive. What is this pasuk telling us? Lo tachlu al adam. You shouldn't eat food, or meat in this case, while there is exposed blood. In other words, if you're, like back in the old days, they were all ranchers. They were all expert in doing shchita and learning how to prepare an animal, etc. And they were used to it. But there's, of course, the major thing that the shochet has to do is after he does the main shchita, where the blood shoots out of the animal and lands on the ground, he has to cover that first jet of blood with earth, because it's considered a ganai, because blood is a living thing. We don't necessarily relate to it that way, but blood has life in it. And to show respect for the blood, we put a little dirt on it, just like lahavdil shelo aleinu, when a person passes away, we don't leave his body out in the open, we cover him as a sign of respect. And so, but now the rabbi is going to make a drush on this. Don't eat meat with uncovered blood of the shechita nearby. Lo ta'achlu kodem shlitpalalu al ha-damchem. He says, first, before you eat, you should pray on your blood. So he's making a play on the words. Don't eat on the blood. He's saying, no, pray about your blood before you eat. Meaning, about that before we eat, we should really do tshuva in order to, because the blood here is a remiss to our soul, that we would not want to pray. We would not want to eat before praying. Rather, we need to pray about our spiritual situation before we go to eat. Because eating, again, in the ancient world, eating was a much more essential part of life, because people had to raise their own food and cook their own food. And nowadays we just go out to the store, we go out to the restaurant, we don't think twice about it. But when you're doing the growing, and you're doing the raising of the animals, and you're doing the shchita, and you're doing the maser and the trumot, and you're doing everything that has to be done around food, you're very connected to your food. And it becomes, and also because I can't go to the local grocery store, life is much more on a thread. If there's suddenly one year there's no rain and there's no crops, people die. Nowadays, they just import food, from another country. Of course, the sad truth is that many people still die of starvation in places like Africa, and this is a problem of distribution, I think, more than growth. But that's another discussion. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Kol ha'ochel v'shoteh. Anybody who eats and drinks, v'ahar kach mitpalel, and then he goes to pray, about him, Katuv Omer, the Torah says, V'oti hishlachta acharai gavecha, al tikra gavecha ela ge'echa. A person who eats and drinks before he prays, God says it's like you threw me over your shoulder, and instead of your shoulder, gavecha, the rabbi makes a drush on the word for your back, or your throwing it behind you. he says ge'echa, which literally means arrogance, right? That a person who's ge'eh is pride. Now, there's good kinds of pride and there's bad kinds of pride. And we are proud to be Jewish. We're proud to be given the Torah. We're proud to try to keep the Torah the best we can. But there's bad pride too. And usually that surfaces as, I do what I want when I want. And I'll eat and drink when I want, and I'll daven when I want. Now, of course, there's circumstances that we're all dealing with. But we understand the basic principle that if I choose to meet my needs before I meet Hashem's needs, who am I putting first? Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu. Now Hashem, Lahar shenitga'eh ze kibel alav malchut shamayim. So, this is very nice because, first of all, you see, the rabbis have this power to say things in the name of God. It says, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu. Now, this wasn't, who wrote this? Somebody, one of the Tanaim. Maybe Rav Ashi who put it together, Ravina. But he has enough spiritual pride, or should we call it confidence. He has God confidence. It's one of the concepts in the book. Right? The God confidence means I have so much confidence in God that He'll do what I need to do, or that I'm doing what He needs me to do, that gives you confidence in Him. And so he says, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, he has no problem saying that, because he knows what he's saying is right on. And what does he say? He says that when a person eats and drinks first and doesn't pray to me first, it's okay. The person got arrogant. What happens? Shenit ga'eh, ahar shenit ga'eh, zeh kibel alav malchut shamayim. He goes back and does a little tshuva. He says, I'm taking on the ol of Shemayim. I made a mistake. I will try to pray first and then eat something. Now, there are all kinds of variations in the halacha about this. In some yeshivas, they serve cake and coffee before davening. In some yeshivas, they only want you to drink water before you daven. And it really depends on where you are in the spectrum of Jewish practice. And it's good to think of the spectrum of Jewish practice like a river with many different streams in it. And they're all part of the same river. So we shouldn't be arguing about the river. It's a river. It's big. Okay. Now, I think we're going to stop here and move on to some halacha. We've been learning halachot of tzitzit from the Arizal.
Can we make a new video?
Sure.